Today I'm actually going to be talking about the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is going to be more relative to those of you who are familiar with the 12 steps, what I'm going to share right now. But I think those of you who may not be as familiar with the 12 steps may get it as well. It's called the 12 steps of insanity. So if you're familiar with the 12 steps, this will ring a bell. We admitted we were powerless over nothing. We could manage our lives perfectly, and we could manage those of anyone else who would allow it. Relate to that? Came to believe that there is no power greater than ourselves, and the rest of the world was insane. Made a decision to have our loved ones and friends turn their wills and lives over to our care. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of everyone we knew. And admitted to the world at large the exact nature of their wrongs. And we're entirely ready to make others straighten up and do right. Demanded others to either shape up or ship out. Made a list of anyone who had ever harmed us, and we became willing to go to any lengths to get even with them. Got direct revenge on such people whenever possible, except when to do so would cost us our own lives, or at the very least, a jail sentence. Continued to take the inventory of others, and when they were wrong, promptly and repeatedly told them about it. Sought through nagging to improve our relationships with others, as we couldn't understand them all at all, asking only that they knuckle under and do things our way. And finally, having had a complete physical, emotional, and spiritual breakdown as a result of these steps, we tried to blame it on others and to get sympathy and pity in all our affairs. Anyone relate to any of that? Just curious. So those of you who are regular here at Unity Spiritual Center Denver probably have caught on to my focus being spiritual awakening and personal transformation. Since that seems to be all I ever talk about, anybody say amen to that? Thank you. And I talk about that because, for several reasons, I guess. One, because that's sort of where I am in my own life, and that's what I'm going through, working through, processing daily. It's my own process of awakening and transformation. And because, from my perspective, it is the answer to any problem that we have. I think it was Wayne Dyer who wrote the book, There's a Spiritual Solution to Every Problem. And I think my answer to that is that Spirit is the solution to every problem as we awaken to that. And so I think that the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous are a path to spiritual awakening. So I want to invite you, if you're saying, well, I don't want to get into the 12 steps, I don't really have an addiction, it's not about me, I want to ask us all to maybe take a step back and just to not think about those people, that have a problem, and just look at it from a perspective of how can I apply these steps to my own life, even if I don't identify as being an addict or having an issue with a substance or a behavior. Because my exploration of these steps really leads me to believe that they are about awakening. The 12 steps are, many people think it's about sobriety. And sobriety is in effect, sobriety is necessary as we work the 12 steps. But the end result, the end goal of working the 12 steps, living the 12 steps, I would say, is spiritual recovery, spiritual awakening. And I think I know these steps over the past 80 plus years have not only saved many people's lives, but have also helped people to awaken to their divine nature. So that's how I want to approach the 12 steps, and we're going to work through it. And I don't know how long this series is going to take. I think we could take a week or a class on every step if we wanted to go that far, but I don't really think I want to go quite that far. But I want to explore this morning the first 3 steps. But before I do that, I just want to say that I was reminded as you shared, as our YOUers shared this morning, about their program and about the emotional and the spiritual and the uplifting that they experienced from this rally. And I was reminded of that I think that for me, any spiritual path that is worth exploring really has at least 4 elements in common, and I believe this is true for the 12 steps. The first one is that it is about a conscious connection with a higher power, a conscious connection with God, Spirit, universe, source, whatever term you want to apply to it. It's about a conscious connection. The second thing is about honest self-connection. Really honestly self-connecting with our own stuff. You know, what's alive? What is my stuff? You know, I think sometimes we get into projecting our things, our issues, our beliefs onto other people, and we want to make it about them. And I think our spiritual path, and I know the 12 steps, calls us into some accountability and responsibility for ourselves. Our own emotions, our own needs, our own actions. And so honest self-connection, but it's also about compassionate connection with ourselves and other people. And I think I love that what I've heard about these rallies and that they embrace each other and they love each other right where they are, no matter what. And they could really be great teachers for us, I think. Loving ourselves right where we are and compassionately connecting with other people. And then the fourth thing is about giving. Giving back, sharing from our own spiritual awakening and our own knowing. Giving, I think, is generous sharing with what we know and what we've learned and how we express in the world. And so I think those 4 elements are key for me in any spiritual path. Is that connection with a higher power, is our honest self-connection, our compassionate connection with ourselves and others, and then giving from that place. And I believe that the 12 steps do encompass all of those things. I think of the 12 steps really as a path, a way of living, a path to enlightenment, to awakening, whatever word, again, you want to call that. So the first step in the 12 steps is we admitted we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. Now, I know, especially in New Thought, to say that we're powerless goes against everything that we have been teaching, right? That we have the power to change our lives is what we teach in Unity, in New Thought. But what I want to say about that is that from my own perspective, that when I rely on my own best thinking, my own best knowledge, my own experience, my own way of thinking, I recognize that my way of thinking sometimes gets in the way of my recognizing and realizing the truth of God within me and within you. My own way of thinking has gotten me where I am today. One of the things I think that we, as the human race, are really attached to or addicted to, if you will, is our way of thinking, our way of being. I've talked about this before, but I think that we get addicted to, I get addicted to me. You know? To the me that I have created. The me that thinks he knows the answer. The me that thinks he knows the answer for you and for me and for the world. The me that is attached to my way of thinking. And we have to be willing to question that. To say, Einstein said, you cannot solve the problem with the same thinking that created it. So if we have something going on in our lives, then we can't really solve it from our normal way of thinking. We have to open ourselves up to a different way of knowing, a different way of thinking, different way of being. Richard Rohr says in his book, Breathing Underwater, which is all about the 12 steps, I would highly recommend it. Ironically and paradoxically, you must go through the place of powerlessness to discover your inner source of power and life. You must be willing to admit that of the self that I think of as me, I'm powerless. And Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What is the kingdom of heaven? Kingdom of heaven is Phyllis, I think, shared this with me once. Our definition of heaven is the ever-expanding awareness of God and good and truth. The kingdom of heaven is the ever-expanding awareness of God and good and truth. And we will never know that until we are willing to admit on some level that we are powerless in and of ourselves. As Jesus said, it is not I, but it is the Father. It is the source. It is the life within me that does the work. And to be poor in spirit doesn't mean that I'm poor. It simply really means to be humble of spirit, to be willing, to be open to something new, to a new awareness. To be poor in spirit means to say, I don't know everything. And to be willing to admit that I, of myself, don't know how to do it. If I knew how to do it, if I knew how to change, I would do it, right? And so there's something bigger, broader, more expansive, greater than me that can do it for me, can do it through me. Eric Butterworth, the great Unity minister and author, said, God can only do for you what God can do through you. And so we have to allow ourselves to open up, to allow that Spirit, the flow of life, to do it through us. I'm going to reveal myself a little bit to you today, although I hesitate to do that because it always makes me look bad. Well, I should say it always reveals my humanness, I guess. Maybe we're all human, right? And so I should be just okay with revealing my humanness. I've had some problems this week in my own mind as I've watched the news and I've looked on Facebook and I've seen different posts about the things that are going on at the Orlando shootings, and I look at the political climate in our country today, and I look at all that and I just think, what are people thinking? What is going on? Is everybody insane? And then what I realized as I meditated on that just yesterday, that I am the one who is insane. When I get caught up in that, I'm the one that's insane. Because it becomes me against them. And I go to war in my own mind. I go to war with those who don't agree with me. Because obviously I'm right. And so I find myself really recognizing my own insanity. Eckhart Tolle talks about that's really our whole humanity is insane. And what is insanity? This is the second step is we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, that infers that we're insane, right? What does it mean to be insane? It's just what I was talking about. My insanity is that I'm separate from you, from God. Insanity really is just skewed thinking. Thinking that's not in alignment with truth. And boy, can I get caught up in that. Thinking that is not in alignment with the God that I know that I am and the God self that I know that you are. And so when I find myself wanting to be right, when I find myself wanting you to be wrong, or anyone else to be wrong or bad or ignorant or whatever words I may choose, I have to recognize that I'm insane. I'm out of my mind, my true mind. I'm out of alignment with the one mind, which is the mind of God. And when I can come back to knowing that truth, that is what restores me to sanity. That is what restores me to sanity. And I can only begin to imagine what world we would create for ourselves and for each other and for all of humanity if we would all allow that higher power to restore us to sanity. And what I say sanity is the consciousness of heaven. The ever-expanding awareness of God and good and truth as me and as you and as all creation. That is sanity. And when I'm restored to sanity, what can I possibly see but God and good and truth in myself and in you and in the world? It restores me to sanity, and in that moment of sanity, I am at peace. I am at peace with the world. I am at peace with myself. I am at peace with you and with all life. Now, what I know is that I then engage with the world again and I become insane again. And so what I want to say about these steps is that it's not a process of, oh, I've got this one, now I've got this one, let me move on to number 4, and I've got this one. It's a continual way of life. Every time I open up Facebook and I read some posts, I go insane. Why do I keep doing that? Again, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results, right? Why do I keep doing it? But I want to get to the place where I can do it, where I can engage and still remain sane. That's the process of working these steps. I have to admit that in that moment I am insane, and I, in my own way of thinking, because I think I'm right, I think I know, then I have to go back to, or I get the opportunity to go back to the first step and say, I am powerless over my own way of thinking, over my habitual way of being in the world, over my desire to go to war with you or myself. I am powerless over that. And it may take me a while. to come to believe that there is a power that can restore me to sanity. But I think that's a process. Our process. We can use the way. I love it. I kind of like to think of it as the Dow of AA. The Dow of the 12 steps. It's a path. It's a way. Really a way that we can choose to live. I was reminded of the story of the prodigal son, and it says when he came to himself, he said, I will get up and go to my father. We have to come to our senses, right? We have to come to the realization that we are powerless, that we cannot do it on our own. That there's something bigger, greater than us, than who we think we are, at least, that can do it through us. The story of the prodigal son is about him then going back to the Father, the source, the power, the higher power, and knowing His truth. And the third step is we made a conscious decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. Again, you know, in the 12-step program, it talks about, I always say one day at a time, and it is one day at a time. But for many of us, for me, it's one moment at a time, right? That every moment is an opportunity for me to turn my will and my life over to the care of a higher power. This is the step that really started me on my earnest search for God. Because the God of my understanding at the time was not a God I was willing to turn my will and my life over to. And so I came to Unity, and Unity helped me find that God. A God of love. I talked about that last week. A God of love and acceptance and inclusion. A God that I was willing to say, yes, I can't do it on my own. I don't know how. I really don't know how to return myself to sanity. And so I'm willing to let you do it through me, as me. Every moment of every day, I get to make that choice. Do I always make that choice? No. I go full steam ahead sometimes with what I think is right, what I think things need to be like, what my own truth, my own best thinking. Has anybody ever experienced that your own best thinking gets you in trouble sometimes? Your own best thinking. And it is that place of insanity. If we're willing to have that honest self-connection where we're in pain, that place of insanity, when I feel that I'm right, you're wrong, I know you don't, that is the place of separation. Separation from God, separation from the Christ, the God within me, and the separation from you. And that's painful. It's a painful place to be. And all the things that we call addictions, I think, alcohol and drugs and sex and shopping and eating and all of the things that we call addictions are behaviors that we use to try to help us not feel the pain. We try to numb the pain of separation through those behaviors. And so I believe that addictions, I like to think of them sometimes as escape mechanisms in a way, that we don't want to feel the pain. So we numb the pain. But what happens with that is that we numb the pain and then we feel the pain again, so it takes more of that same thing to keep numbing the pain. But the pain doesn't go away because the pain is not sourced from out here. The pain is sourced from separation. And the only cure for that sense of separation is awakening to the Spirit of God within us, awakening to the truth of our being, admitting that in my own self I am powerless to do anything about it, and to be willing to come to the understanding that there is something that is more powerful than my limited perspective of myself. I came to believe that. And then I became willing. Again, in 12 steps, you talk about being willing to be willing. I'm willing to be willing, but I'm not yet really willing. But I'm willing to be willing. So that's part of the path as well. Am I willing to be willing? And of course, the Miracles talks about, well, you don't know how. You don't do it because you don't know how. That's what I said earlier. You don't know how. But we have to admit that we don't know how. Don't you think if we knew how, as human beings, if we really knew how, that we would live in a very different world? I think we would. I think we would. And so how do we do that? You know, the best way I know how to do that, really, is, first of all, prayer and meditation. Meditation, for me, is a key to connecting with that God within me, to really having the experience of the divine. Prayer is that process of aligning our thinking, our minds, with the mind of God. You know, we don't pray for an outcome. We pray in order to condition our thinking, our minds, with the mind of God, with the truth, with our oneness. Aligning our minds in that truth, aligning our hearts in that truth through meditation, and really beginning to embody that truth. And these steps that we take from that place, we'll talk about that. The 11th step is about continuing to be in prayer and meditation as a way of life. And I think it has to be our way of life. Because it is a path. And for me, it is a circuitous path. It's not a linear path. And it's not about working one step today, one step tomorrow. It's about working all of the steps, really, as we work through them. And so as we explore that for the next few weeks, this idea of the 12 steps, or 12 steps to personal transformation. Our mission is here at Unity Spiritual Center is that we inspire spiritual awakening and personal transformation. So how can we use these 12 steps in our lives to awaken to our spiritual nature and allow these to then transform our way of living in the world? So I hope you'll join me next week as we look at steps 4 and 5, which are taking a fearless and moral inventory of ourselves. And what do we do with that? What does that mean for us? How does that work for us?